VPNs, or virtual private networks, are one of the, if not the most overhyped and misunderstood technologies that the average everyday user has potential access to and may be considering using one themselves. I have seen it all over the place as an IT and cybersecurity professional for over a decade, and a lot of users aren't using it right. It potentially can make you less secure, as well as the fact that not all VPN providers can be trusted. There are attacks against VPNs. Some businesses are moving away from VPNs as a means of secure connections into zero trust network access, and we'll be talking about what is a VPN exactly so you can better understand this technology. But first, make sure to hit the like button so the YouTube gods know how to modify their algorithms so that you can get more of this content pushed to you. Hit subscribe to see more of my content, and don't forget to check out all of the other socials that I have down in the links below. Let's take a minute here to make sure that you hit the like button, subscribe to see more of my content, and we're going to talk about my amazing sponsor, you. My lovely community. None of this could happen without any of you. So whether you're supporting me through the merch that you've bought in the store, like these tumblers, the t-shirts, the stickers, or the desk mats, or many other things we're working on creating, like possibly like some wine tumblers, as well as pet accessories, or you just subscribe on Twitch or Patreon, tip me on Stream Elements, give me biddies on Twitch, or the upcoming YouTube memberships, or just stick around and watch my videos regularly, I could not have this happen without any of you. Your support is what helps benefit this channel so we can improve the quality of the content that we cover, as well as pay for the hardware and things so that I can cover more different content for all of you. None of this could happen without you, my loving community. Make sure to also follow me on all of my other social medias, as well as join the Discord. I couldn't have this happen without any of all of you, and I am forever grateful. So let's start off with what is a VPN, or virtual private network. Contrary to a lot of popular belief out there, the primary purpose of a VPN is not for you actually to connect to a remote server, to relay your connection and all traffic over said server, and geographically look like you are in a different place. That happens to be a byproduct of the overall functionality that a VPN can allow you to have. What is more commonly used with a VPN in the business world is to access it in one of basically two ways, as I have seen. The first one being similar to what a lot of you do, where you have a client installed on your device that allows you to connect into this VPN endpoint. Now, with that client being installed, very often it can be OpenVPN. I've seen Cisco AnyConnect. There's a lot of different vendors out there for VPNs, whether they be open source or proprietary corporate products. We're not going to get too much into the nitty-gritty of that, but we're going to go at the base high level here of how they operate. Once you have this client connected, you connect to the VPN server, and that VPN server can either be a dedicated box behind the network edge, which is the firewall or router, or it can actually be hosted on the firewall or router, like I do with my pfSense, or I've done in the past with WatchGuard, Sophos, Unify, and other devices. And that client then allows you to connect into that VPN connection so that you can then access the resources as assigned into the VPN server, so you can access depending on which VPN route. Say you now have access to what system administrators should have, everyday employees, and there's a lot of rules and stuff you can configure based upon the rules and access that you want to grant to that. The other way that this is often done inside of businesses is what's known as a site-to-site VPN. The wording may be different across many different vendors, but the concept is the same. You basically have a VPN on one device and another VPN on another device, usually at the network edge, and then these two talk to each other and they have a constant bridge so that they can share resources. So companies with people at site A can actually have them access resources in site B, and they can be configured in a multitude of ways. I know where I work at, for example, we have VPNs and fallback VPNs, plus VPNs to connect to certain on-premise locations in a variety of different ways. There's a lot that can go into the overall discussion of VPNs, but I wanted to keep this more at a high level. The ability for you to relay all your connection over these VPN servers is Again, just a secondary function that they have. You often can actually create what's called a split tunnel VPN, which means that I can actually say, hey, everything for regular traffic, I want to go over the regular network that you have. But anything that happens to be in this IP range, let's say we'll just put like a 10.10 network, anything with those IP addresses will actually then route over the VPN to access company resources. So not all companies that run a VPN will proxy all traffic through it. And that brings me to the other topic here. Proxies and VPNs are two different things. Proxies are more specific on how they actually go about, whereas a VPN will encapsulate all the traffic, or as we discussed with the split tunnel, selective traffic. So you can chain a proxy and VPN together, but it's a little bit more involved. We're not going to really spend too much time on that in this video, nor will we talk about the layering of I2P and Tor on top of VPNs, pros and cons of it. That, I think, warrants a whole other video with its own discussion, but we will touch a little bit on that in terms of privacy technologies in a little bit here. So while I have just discussed remote access VPNs, which I also often call client VPNs, and site-to-site VPNs, split tunneling and full tunneling, there's a few different technologies that can power the VPN itself and how it encapsulates said data. And the most popular one right now is OpenVPN. It's tried, it's trusted, it's mature, it's open source, it's available to everyone, whether you're on Mac, Windows, Linux, FreeBSD, Haiku, whatever. There's options out there for you to use with it, and that is the most popular option. You'll find even if you fire up Proton or another VPN company that they will have this option very often in there. The other option that is becoming more popular and is also open sourced is WireGuard. It is a little bit faster, but it hasn't taken over OpenVPN yet. It probably will in the next few years. The other ones that I've seen over the years in my, professional experience are IPsec with IKEv2, L2TP, PPTP, which you should really avoid using, which is point-to-point tunneling protocol, and of course there's also a dynamic multi-point VPN. Haven't run into that as much, but it is an option there. But for the most part, most of y'all only need to understand OpenVPN and WireGuard. If you're professionally in IT and cybersecurity, probably going to want to understand IPsec with IKEv2, as well as L2TP a little bit more, because you will come across those. And in some older businesses, probably understanding PPTP, because you're going to want to probably rip that out and replace it with something better if your business is still running that. Just my 2 cents. So now let's get into the part where I talk about VPNs are being misunderstood as well as overhyped. And to be clear, I'm not saying that VPNs are snake oil. They are a valuable piece of software in having a layered defense, but a lot of those influencers out there don't know much about technology, and they're just trying to sell a product to make them $1 without fully understanding the actual usefulness, as well as where it doesn't really help out that much when it comes to a VPN. The honest truth is, a lot of you would actually benefit more from behavioral changes in how you use the internet than how you access the internet. The reality is, if you're going to use a VPN and do the exact same things in the exact same ways, you're not adding any privacy, because Facebook and all of those apps are still going to phone home with all of your data, and they're still going to know it's you because you've previously logged in through other routes and everything like that before. Not only that, the security benefits of a VPN are often oversold. I know a lot of these VPNs offer malware protection services and things like that, but if you understand that a lot of traffic is already encrypted, the VPN itself isn't doing any SSL TLS inspection to decrypt the information going over the VPN for inspection and then blocking the things. A lot of the nefarious things will still make it to you. However, a lot of these are employing DNS blocks, which could also be done in your own network or things like that. There's services like Quad9 that actually blocks a lot of malware-related domains and things like that, and I actually already use that in my home network. The other thing is that a VPN is not going to add any additional benefit in a trusted network. For example, your home network. I'm going to tell a lot of you out there, I understand that some of you are being censored from your government and things like that from accessing certain content. This isn't about that. If you have an issue where you possibly think or even know you need a VPN to access free information, you have a bigger issue than just a technology one. You now have a legal and rights issue. This isn't getting into that as much, and even then, I would probably make arguments a little bit more for Tor, but there's some nuance around that as well. The reality is, if you are in your own trusted network, I wouldn't be looking at a VPN for your security. I would be looking at antivirus or an EDR, endpoint detection and response system, because that can actually run on the system when that traffic is decrypted on the device, and then be able to do the inspection and all the blocking that needs to be done from malicious things. A VPN is a good part of a layered approach, but in a trusted network is essentially useless, with the exception of you are accessing geo-blocked content. Like, for example, I was in Portugal, I wanted to watch Hulu. While I was there, I turned on my Proton VPN, and then I actually was able to watch Hulu and everything just as I were back in the States. Same with Crunchyroll and all of that. That does make sense, but that's not a security nor privacy thing. That's more of an access thing. A security thing is when I'm in the airport and I want to do some work and have an additional ability to secure that content. Hey there, it is post-recording, middle of editing, Chief Geek 3D. I wanted to talk about something that I know some people are going to bring up when it comes to VPNs, is that with HSTS as well as HTTPS, you should not even ever really need a VPN. And while in an ideal world, I would be inclined to agree with such a statement, the problem is that is under the assumption that the server is being properly maintained, patched, and configured. And you know what they say about assuming, it makes an ass out of you and me. If you'll notice with the entire video about VPN and everything, I center around the word trust. You have to trust that the server is being maintained, patched, and configured appropriately. You have to trust that the VPN provider is not doing anything nefarious with your stuff. You have to trust that, the ISP themselves. That's inevitably what a lot of this boils down to. But the reality is, when it comes to HTTPS, I've found that there have been servers that are misconfigured that are transmitting both mixed HTTP and HTTPS type content that, if misconfigured in the right ways, you can exploit a server using the HTTP streams. Again, there's a lot of things that go into that, but it is a possibility, as well as HSTS would have to be configured appropriately on their end in order for it to really matter. It's a nice thing to have an additional layer in a public Wi-Fi if you're connecting to these things, so things aren't potentially exposed as easily on a public network. But nonetheless, VPNs definitely are overhyped and misunderstood for a myriad of different reasons. And again, in most cases, HTTPS and HSTS should be enough to make sure you have a private and secure connection to the resources you're connecting with. However, that doesn't always guarantee that they actually are as secure as they say they are. Vulnerabilities come out all the time. I came across a few servers even just a couple of years ago that were still not patched from the 2014 SSL Heartbleed bug, which was a huge issue with a lot of server owners and operators. And the same thing can be said today, is that another vulnerability could come out, and we have to make sure the server maintainers patch their systems, as well as even now make sure it's configured and everything appropriately. I just wanted to touch on this specific point because I know some people are going to talk about this, and I wanted to get this part out there at least. Anyway, back to the video. But that leads to my next point when it comes to why VPN is often overhyped as well as misunderstood. You are going to have to implicitly completely, trust that VPN, whether it's one you've created yourself or it is a service that you have purchased through someone else. And then you are going to need to make sure that they are trustworthy, ethical, and secure. And when it comes to being ethical, it doesn't mean just, oh, we're not going to, touch your data and all that. But if you happen to be the victim of a compromise, such as a hacking or just an overall vulnerability that was reported by a security researcher, that you then perform ethical disclosures to the public so that people can be aware there was an issue. I don't judge a company by if they have a vulnerability or if they get breached. I judge them based on the response to said actions. That, I think, is more important. For example, when LastPass was breached, a few years ago, first time was like, okay, this happens, but then they got breached several times. And one of those we found out was the result of an unpatched Plex box on a developer's network that somehow gained access to LastPass systems, which then completely made me shun their entire product. Well, NordVPN had a situation a few years ago, back in 2018, where a server of theirs was accessed, and then they didn't detect it for about a year. That, in the grand scheme, bad enough as it is, but the reality is, for many of you out there, that the average compromise isn't detected in most businesses for at least 6 months. People are having, hackers live in their network for 6, 9, maybe 12 or more months before detection. But that all right. The fact that they took 7 more months to disclose the issue that they had was a problem. Now, I'm going to be linking this article down below because there's a lot that I don't want to get into here, but you can see the back and forth that made me raise an eyebrow to NordVPN, because the reality is NordVPN, like many other companies out there, they don't own their own infrastructure. They rent servers from other providers. And in this case, they happen to point the finger at a third-party provider, Krianova, and Krianova was saying that NordVPN didn't secure the remote management that they're supposed to do on these servers. And to be completely honest, having been in the situation of renting servers and having to secure my own infrastructure and things like that, I'm going to side with Krianova on that whole situation there. With that whole situation, as you'll read through the article, you'll come to understand why NordVPN is not on my good side of things, and I have not recommended them for many years, and I don't continue to plan on doing so. I know right now it looks like they're doing transparency reports and all of that, but this is just one of those things I can't completely shake. Maybe they'll turn a new leaf in a few years, and I'll maybe have them on my good side again, but again, it was just such a blunder that I can never look them in the eye and really fully trust them and what they're saying. Because it's one thing if you have a vulnerability and then you have it embargoed because you're patching it up and then you release the information as soon as the embargo lifts and everything's all good. Or you do have a compromise, you find it, you patch it, and then you disclose it. But waiting 7 months after detection to disclose this whole thing, and from my understanding, there was a little bit of a pressure from a cybersecurity researcher to disclose this issue. It's a little bit problematic from me, not to mention the back and forth between a third party and them. It just felt a lot worse than the whole CrowdStrike versus Microsoft situation, because the CrowdStrike versus Microsoft situation, okay, that was an issue, but I'm gonna say CrowdStrike immediately jumped on the bandwagon, tried to fix the problem, and even offered boots on the ground for businesses that were still not able to get their systems back up. And a lot of the situation with CrowdStrike, to be honest, had more to do with companies not having a business continuity plan and disaster recovery plan. That's a whole other situation that I don't want to go into right now, but needless to say, you have to trust these companies implicitly or your own infrastructure and maintain it. And there's a lot of arguments for a lot of people out there that they should only run their own servers. However, when running your own server, it should be important to note that a lot of the people are trying to use a VPN to be able to access geo-blocked content. If you are having that server hosted in another data server, those IP addresses are often well known to a lot of people trying to look for VPNs like Netflix and Hulu and things like that. So you would need to get a residential IP to be able to run that, which you can easily do by, say, if you have a pfSense box and set up dynamic DNS and then have it run through your house, and there's all different ways you can set it up. We're not going to get too into that in this video, just the high-level idea of this overall. Hey there, it's post-recording, middle of editing Chief Geek 3D again. So one of the things that I had mentioned just in passing was timing attacks with VPNs, and I wanted to get a little bit more in on how a VPN can potentially make you less secure. And again, this goes back into what I was saying about user behaviors and things like that, because you can, of course, use a VPN to encrypt your traffic, but of course, there's not much you can do to control the timing of how things are sent. So the timing and volume of incoming and outgoing packets can always reveal patterns that an attacker can use, so they can correlate these things. They can de-anonymize a lot of this information as well. And certain websites have certain loads and patterns that, go with different things, so they can actually see what you're actually accessing, even though you may be using a VPN. There are, of course, ways to mitigate this. There's ways to use VPNs with a little bit of padding and obfuscation. There's multi-hop VPNs. You can combine a VPN with Tor, potentially. You can use traffic shaping techniques, as well as the main thing is just avoiding predictable behavior. And that's the thing I keep harping on throughout this video, is that VPNs are misunderstood and a little bit overhyped, because ultimately, to get the best usage and effect out of this tool, just like any other security tool, comes down to a change in user behaviors. Of course, you want VPNs with more advanced privacy features, and that's one of the reasons why I have a very small selection of VPNs that I recommend people use if you're not building a VPN yourself. Ultimately, it's a cat and mouse game with cybersecurity. One day you have a fix, the next day they're attacking the fix, and then we're moving on into different ways. Ultimately, what I'm hoping to drive through with this video is that it's user behavior changes that are the ultimate thing that will help you with security and privacy, not adding another tool. And adding another tool without fully understanding its uses, its capabilities, as well as its limitations can ultimately make you less secure. So now I think it's important that we talk about zero trust network access, which is where a lot of businesses are starting to trend towards and moving away from VPN. Because the reality is VPN servers are starting to get attacked a lot in businesses, because that is seen as the gateway for a lot of the more sensitive things. So what a lot of businesses are doing is they're getting away from their VPN servers, and they're starting to deploy zero trust network access solutions such as TwinGate, which I've used in my own home lab. It's really great, and I plan to use it more with my cloud lab that I'm going to be spinning up in the next few weeks. And the other solution that's really popular in the enterprise space, and I really like it myself, and this might piss off a lot of people that I say that I like it, is Zscaler. Both of these are zero trust network access that allow for additional securities, because you don't have an actual VPN server that you're logging in through. You are logging with a provider that happens to allow the connection to an app connector, and that app connector is then behind firewalled resources, allowing access based upon the policies set in your ZTNA provider. So they allow a lot easier, lower overhead connection with the ability to do even more security than a VPN can, because with a VPN, that's just your first layer, and then you have to add things on top of it, whereas things like Zscaler have DLP, data leak prevention, as well as other things like isolated browsing. So while you're actually browsing the internet, you can have your browser completely isolated and sandboxed. So imagine, if you would, it's kind of like you are in a remote connection into a box, so anything that were to detonate would be inside of there. And they recently even upped it to 100 megabyte PDFs. I would love to deploy Zscaler in my home lab. I've reached out to them, but they want a minimum of 50 seats, and I am just one guy. So Probably a lofty dream, but nonetheless, TwinGate is a good solution to be able to play with these things. However, they only really work in selective cases. So if you are trying to access certain apps, resources, and things like that, they do not work in the same way as a VPN that allows you to proxy all of the traffic there. However, it can allow you to filter things. For example, with Zscaler, we can actually restrict certain traffic based upon company policies. So, for example, if we don't want you to visit a certain type of content that has to do with adults, we can do that. We can ban that. We can monitor the traffic that's going through. And it also gives us some tools to better diagnose how their connectivity is going on than, say, a typical VPN. At least in my opinion on things. ZTNA is, I think, going to be the future for a lot of businesses because VPNs themselves are a vulnerability in the fact that you usually have to host a VPN server, and that's where they're all going to attack. And if they get access to the VPN server or servers, it's then, at that point, having to do a lot of work. And with VPN servers, we actually had an interesting case where one of the executives where I work, they were getting brute forced, somebody trying to access the VPN server, and that executive kept getting locked out from using their own VPN because of the brute force attacks on said VPN server. And we had to do this whole cat and mouse game of adjusting things on the VPN server, and then every couple of weeks or so, we'd find that executive would again be locked out. When we completely switched over to Zscaler, these problems went away because now it had to tie into the whole other system with SSO and all of that implied and connected, and it was just a beautiful thing to be able to rest easier at night. So, nonetheless, ZTNA is going to be the future, I think, for a lot of businesses, and VPN will probably fall out of favor for a lot of things, with the exception of site-to-site VPNs. I don't see that being replaced by ZTNA for anywhere in the near future. The other beautiful things about ZTNA is that it allows us to have a completely zero-trusted network, so that even inside of a quote-unquote trusted network, there is no such thing. Even at work, when I am in the physical building at work, everything is monitored and inspected and routed over into Zscaler for all of the inspections and all of that. I really like how it works. Yes, some people have complaints with Zscaler, but I think overall, compared to a traditional VPN, it's a much better and holistic solution to cover compliance and security. Be that as it may, let's talk on solutions that you probably can be using more in your own day-to-day. So while I love Zero Trust network access, and I definitely see it as the future for a lot of businesses for the foreseeable future and not really changing, it is honestly, of course, not an option for the average everyday person because of the use case around it. However, I will say there are some legitimate reasons to use a VPN, such as some people that say they torrent on it, or you need remote access to different things, the geo-blocks as I had mentioned. But when a lot of people come around and say, well, it helps privacy and anonymity, that's actually more dependent upon your behavior with how you're using the internet whilst behind a VPN than that you are using a VPN. The honest truth is if you are using your device in the same exact manner, logged into all the same data collecting apps, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, you name it, and you don't change anything about that behavior, your VPN's not adding any benefit to you. That's the honest truth. If someone really wants to, they can then figure out, yeah, they were behind this VPN at this time because they were logged into Google and it was coming through this IP address, so we can see that they were actually going through this route of a VPN server at this time, and then start correlating different data. You get enough data points, you can start de-anonymizing people. And the honest truth is, I would tell a lot of people that it's more a matter of you changing your behaviors and how you use the internet, rejecting cookies and all these different things, than it is to add a tool. And even so, if you're looking at a tool to remain more private, I'd probably steer more people to the Tor browser, the Onion router, or, combine it with Whonix or something like that. But even then, there's some drawbacks to Tor, because again, it's behavioral based. And I know some people are going to say, hasn't Tor been compromised by the government or anything like that? Not really. Most of the compromises had to do with people not updating their, packages and services. And if you keep everything up to date, most vulnerabilities aren't there. Most vulnerabilities that get exploited inside of businesses and individuals are the result of people that do not patch their systems. And because they don't patch their systems, they then have vulnerabilities that were discovered in prior versions, because most updates that I see have to do with security vulnerabilities being patched, at least in my experience, because I'm in cybersecurity. Be that as it may, a lot of the things, whether you're using a VPN, whether you're using Tor, whether you're using I2P, all depend on your behavior and how you use the internet rather than how you access the internet to make sure you remain private and anonymous. If you still end up logging into Google and YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and everything, there's enough data points that if somebody really needs to go after you, they can figure out they were on this route at this time and start correlating different things. And yes, there are no logs collected by these VPN providers, but there's other ways to collect that data without logs. There's a lot that goes into it. Again, behavioral changes are what matter more than the tool that you use to access it. So be that as it may, with everything being said, there are quite a few people out there that still have a use case for a VPN, whether it be, hey, I need to do my torrenting, hey, I need to get around a geo-block, things like that. There are still a few solutions out there, and I will tell you the things that I recommend and that I trust. So the first thing is, of course, making your own VPN server. This is, of course, not a route I would recommend for the average person. If you're technically savvy, you know how to administrate a system, and, you can keep on top of the maintenance and everything like that, this might be an option for you. Of course, there's OpenVPN and WireGuard. There's many documents out there, whether it be from DigitalOcean or other vendors out there that have their own configuration. One easy-to-use solution that I've used over the course of my years for businesses to make it easy, because not everyone is as comfortable with command line interfaces as myself, is PryTunnel or pre-tunnel. I've never figured out what they actually call it. It sounds like PryTunnel because it's like private tunnel, but either way, they do allow you to deploy one free server, and then you can pay $10 per month for a premium one to host it on your own infrastructure. This is something you can host yourself. And again, going back to what I said before, a lot of streaming services want to see a residential IP, so you could take this, probably host it on a small computer inside your network, set up the routing or such, and if you want, use a dynamic DNS to point it to a domain so that you can actually have your own server from your own residence at any given time, and you can always guarantee that you will have a residential connection coming from your own network. And there's benefits if you do run it on your own network and you have pfSense or stuff like that. You can actually then, set up a pfSense box to be your VPN server as well as your router, and then affix all the IDS, IPS, and block lists and all those protections in the pfSense firewall, similar to a lot of the security features that a lot of providers are offering. Now, if you can't figure out how to operate your own VPN server, that is fine. There are a couple of vendors that I actually do trust and I use pretty often for my own needs for these kinds of things. Like I've said, I'm not saying that all VPNs are snake oil, just that they are overhyped and misunderstood by the average person. With that being said, the services that I recommend there are two paid-for VPN services that I recommend. The first one being is Mulvad. Mulvad, really great, really private VPN service company out of Sweden. They very inexpensive. You can pay them in the most anonymous of ways. I have, seen people pay them in Bitcoin and Monero, which they do give you a 10% discount as of this video right now. And it allows you to access different servers. They actually own a lot of their own data centers and things like that. The one downside that I found with Mulvad is, while they are definitely the most private, they're not the most reliable if you're wanting to watch Hulu, Netflix, and all of that. They often do not work with any of those services. But if you're just needing a quick, reliable VPN that allows you to have a reasonably trustworthy system, plus the fact that they don't really collect PII, you can potentially have them generate an account number. That's a random number. There's no email address attached to it other than your payment information. But if you then use either Cash, Bitcoin, or Monero, no name will be attached to that. So you can have the most private option out the box there. But again, probably not going to fit the needs of a lot of people that are trying to get around geoblocks. So the other solution that I have is Proton, which I am affiliated with. You can check the links down below, but I've been using Proton for several years, and I went to them first for private encrypted email access. And my private email server I decommissioned a few years ago because it was too much of a hassle for me to maintain myself. Proton has a great suite of tools. So they do have a free VPN, but with the free one, you can't really select the servers, and it's a little bit slower. But you pay for their premium email service, the VPN's packaged in there, but it also has a password manager and Google Doc equivalent kind of system so you can store your different files and edit them in a really secure and private way. So I definitely can't recommend them enough. Both Molvad and Proton allow signups over Tor as well, and you can pay Proton in Bitcoin as well. So there are ways to keep it a little bit more private. I know NordVPN and some others allow Bitcoin payments, but we already talked about NordVPN a little bit earlier and why I don't really trust them. But again, to reiterate, VPNs are often overhyped and misunderstood, so the average person may not even really need a VPN outside of maybe having a more secure connection in a public hotspot. But again, you have to be able to trust that provider that you're using because you're moving the trust merely upstream for your internet access, as well as the fact that it's more about user behavioral changes than the tool that you're using to access the internet that will impact your security and privacy overall. There's a lot of ways you can slice this. It's one of those Morpheus handing you the red pill and blue pill kind of moments of you can take the blue pill, go back to sleep and believe in whatever you want. You can take the red pill and I can show you how deep this rabbit hole goes. I know people that when they go to DEF CON, for example, don't use VPNs. They have entire burner devices that they wipe clean when they leave DEF CON, and that's how they remain private and secure. And then they have their own personal device that they access in certain ways. There's many different ways to go around this, and that goes around your threat model and what are your perceived threats and priorities with these different things. So overall, VPNs definitely are a worthwhile security tool to know and understand in your arsenal. The problem is that to the overall average everyday person, they are grossly misunderstood and overhyped. There are definitely use cases to use them, whether you're torrenting or you're getting around geo-blocks, doing remote access of content on a corporate VPN, but user behavioral changes and modifications are going to help you out with privacy and security more so than anything. VPN is just one tool in the arsenal. You should never, ever look at any tool as the silver bullet. 99% of issues in cybersecurity come down to end user behavior, and if they just change the behavior a little bit, it would stop them from getting phished and many other sorts of types of attacks. VPNs definitely are worthwhile to look at for different solutions. I see them as staying around in terms of site to site for businesses. As far as client access, remote access VPNs, I definitely see them phasing out for zero trust network access in terms of businesses. And for the everyday user, if you can't at least make your own VPN server, which is the most trustworthy, there are a couple of providers that I had mentioned before, whether it's Proton or Molvad. I'll make sure to have links down below for all of you. But at the end of the day, it matters more about how you use the internet than how you access the internet. I personally only use it when I'm in a public hotspot, as well as when I am trying to get geo-blocked content, and of course in the corporate sense of having to access certain sites Although most of the places that I, am dealing with are zero trust network access these days, with very few exceptions. Most of those exceptions have to do with my current home lab infrastructure that I haven't converted over to using things like TwinGate. Anyway, thank you all for joining me and watching this video. Make sure to check me out on all of my other social media. We go live on Twitch, talk about cybersecurity, tech, gaming on Linux, as well as I'm on many other platforms, Bluesky, Mastodon, and more. Make sure to like and subscribe. And of course, happy hacking. Stay safe out there. I love y'all.